Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants, and welcome to this session where we'll be presenting the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD's work evaluating IFAD's engagement in small island developing states. My name is Mona Fatou. I'm the Deputy Director of the Independent Office of Evaluation at IFAD, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Max Kodjo, who led this evaluation, and Maciel Jimenez, who also worked on the evaluation. So we'll be presenting this work and also allowing some time at the end for any questions. So if you have any questions, please place them in the chat and we'll be happy to respond. So work in small island developing states, or SIDS as the acronym goes, is an increasing area of engagement for IFAD. IFAD's been increasing its support in general in more fragile and vulnerable contexts. These contexts span across several different geographical zones, but they all share certain similarities in terms of vulnerabilities, in particular when it comes to climate shocks, when it comes to natural resource management. And this is something that the evaluation examined and will be presenting today. So I will go ahead and turn it over to the presenters, starting with Max, and he will take you through the main findings of the evaluation. Maciel will then present some of the findings from the case studies of the evaluation before we move to the questions. So thanks again for your participation, and over to you, Max. You're on mute, Max.
Thank you, Mona. Let's start with sharing the presentation. Sarah? Yeah, presentation notes. Okay, next slide. Just go to the background slide. This was the first evaluation of IFAD support to seeds, and the scope included 30 IFAD finance loan operations across 18 recipient seeds in the Pacific, Asia, Caribbean, and Africa. We also assess IFAD support to non-lending activity. The evaluation design was theory-based, and the team reconstructed a theory of change which integrated critical seed topic of multidimensional vulnerability versus multidimensional resilience covering social, economic, environmental, and climate change aspects. We applied a mixed method approach complemented by case study mission in 6 seeds, namely Belize, Comoros, Grenada, Kiribati, Maldives, and Sao Tome and Principe. We use AI-assisted tool for the test review to extract relevant data, which were subsequently analyzed and validated by evaluation analysts. The evaluation team drew finding, conclusion, and recommendation after triangulation from various sources and approaches. Next slide. So let's look at the finding in terms of relevance. Finding showed that resilience building emerged as a recurrent objective of IFAD engagement in seeds, with intervention addressing multi-dimensional vulnerability, namely social, economic, environmental, and climate change related. However, the depth and rigor of vulnerability analysis varied significantly across project and region. Environmental and climate change vulnerability were the most consistently addressed, often benefiting from substantial support. In this regard, IFAD intervention complemented well national and international initiatives aimed at strengthening resilience in seeds. Let's move to the next slide. So let's look at now specific findings in terms of the topic of today, natural resource management and climate change adaptation. The evaluation findings show that supported IFAD operations were relevant and effective in enhancing absorptive and adaptive capacity of smallholder by promoting sustainable and climate-smart agricultural practices, small-scale irrigation system and tolerant crop variety that contributed to boost productivity, also improve practices for soil and water management, as well as for degraded land rehabilitation. Let's look at concrete applied solution. Next slide. So, in terms of promoted sustainable and climate-smart agricultural practices, we had found support in terms of drought and salinity tolerant crop, soil and water conservation technique, greenhouses and hydroponic production technique, water harvesting system and water management practices, small-scale irrigation system, integrated pest management and organic agriculture, reforestation and land rehabilitation. In terms of support to livelihood and income source diversification, we found support to cropping diversification and offline enterprises development, value chain development, support and market access, sustainable fishery and aquaculture development. In terms of nutrition and food security intervention, support were related to backyard garden for household consumption, community-based nutrition education linked to the goal of dietary diversification, promotion of local sensitive food crops and food system, and specific example. So let us look at case study example. Over to Martial. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you. So as explained before with the evaluation, we conducted several case studies across the different regions of the seeds. And in the case of Eastern Southern Africa, we went to Sao Tome and Principe. And here, some of the main achievements that we observed from the interventions of IFAD include soil and water conservation initiatives and techniques, climate resilient crop varieties and sustainable cultural methods, increasing the carbon sequestration capacity of production systems, and training for farmers in agroecology, agroforestry, intercropping, and other sustainable farming practices. Well, these were overall good achievements observed in Sao Tome. Some of the challenges included limited financial capacity reliance on external funding, small-scale interventions, and weak environmental monitoring, which reduced overall ecosystem impact, and climate risk assessments were mostly descriptive, limiting their usefulness for planning and implementation across the country. Next slide, please. Now, for the case of Belize in Latin America and the Caribbean region, some of the achievements included sustainable land management practices, such as agroforestry and soil conservation, which were highly promoted by IFAD interventions in the country. Smallholder training on climate resilient agriculture, which led to enhanced adaptive capacity of farmers and improved food security, and enhanced market linkages for smallholder farmers. Again, some of the challenges observed include limited ownership and funding, which hinder widespread of practices, limited exchange of best practices among farmers. There was a lack of comprehensiveness of vulnerability assessment, and the mainstreaming of climate resilience in national frameworks was not sufficient. Next slide, please. Now, for the case of Maldives in the Asia-Pacific region, some of the achievements include promotion of rainwater harvesting, small-scale irrigation, drought and saline-tolerant crops. There was an efficient use of land and water through greenhouse-based and hydroponic production interventions, which proved to be effective as adaptation measure among beneficiaries, and community training, which improved awareness and sustainable use of marine resources. Among the challenges observed include limited scale of supports, connectivity challenges, which is again one of the main traits that we found also across seeds, which constrain commercialization and adaptive practices, and limited preparedness of smallholders to natural disasters. Next slide. And finally, for the case of Kiribati, some of the achievements include support of composting, organic farming, and revitalization of coconut plantations, the promotions of indigenous plants for sustainable cultural development, elaboration of community development plans, and support of diversifying income sources from home gardens and off-farm activities. Some of the challenges include climate change vulnerability analysis, which were insufficiently comprehensive, and again, remoteness of weak infrastructure hindered implementation and access to market and commercialization. So I'll now leave the floor to Mona. Thank you.
Thank you, Maciel. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, the evaluation found that the inclusion of natural resource management and climate change vulnerability analyses were very relevant and informed interventions. However, the depth of these analyses did vary across regions and projects, as you saw in some of the case study examples. Applied approaches that address all environmental vulnerabilities varied across the regions, but were more consistent and sound when it came to climate change resilience. And the evidence of IFAD's contribution to enabling sustainable and resilient agricultural productions was found generally across the different contexts, but there was a limited scale of IFAD support for natural resource management and climate change resilience. Thus, it really highlighted the need for partnerships with other organizations, especially considering the fact that IFAD is often a smaller player in many of these contexts, and the nature of the challenges does require very much a coordinated and consolidated effort. So with that said, I wish to thank Max and Maciel for their presentation of the evaluation findings, and thank everyone for listening. And we're open to questions. If you could add them in the chat, we'd be happy to answer, because there was quite a lot. It was a very comprehensive evaluation, and this really only scratches the surface. So please do raise any questions. And while we're waiting, in the meantime, a question directed for you, Maciel. Maybe if you could provide some examples of measures or approaches that were promoted through IFAD support across the region for effective resilience of agroecological systems.
Yeah. Thank you. So again, across the different regions that we observed with the case studies and the analyses, some of these agroecologic practices included drip irrigation, water pumping, improved water resource studies. So for example, in WCA in Western Central Africa, we saw that in Guinea-Bissau, farmers adopted climate-resilient rice varieties and mangrove riverbank restoration. Whereas in Sao Tome and Principe, we saw that farmers promoted organic and shade-grown production to strengthen soil health. So we saw that these were very good and interesting agroecological practices. Now, in the Latin American region, the projects of IFAD supported projects invested in water harvesting, small-scale irrigation, climate information systems, and renewable energy and technologies. This was observed mostly in Grenada, Belize, and Guyana. Whereas in Cuba, we observed that solar-powered electric fences and biodigesters really contributed to enhance energy efficiency and nutrition recycling. Now, for the case of Asia-Pacific region, in the case studies that we observed, which included Kiribati, Fiji, Solomon Island, and Tonga, we saw that investments really strengthen ecosystem health through agroforestry, organic farming, and biodiversity-friendly land management. Not sure if this responds to the question. Hopefully it does.
No, it does. Thank you, Maciel. And in the meantime, we've gotten a couple of questions through in the chat. So I'll read out the first one, which is, could you elaborate on one of the challenges identified in the case studies regarding the descriptive nature of climate risk assessments, and what would make those more useful? I don't know, Max, if you'd like to take that.
Let me respond to that question. The main climate risks as a challenge identified in all seeds is natural hazards. As you know, those all seeds are exposed to natural hazards like a typhoon, like a hurricane. And this is not an area of comparative advantage of IFAD, so that's why IFAD has worked in partnership with other UN agencies to address that. We found that IFAD started some action to prevention action with the Pacific Island to prepare in terms of preparedness to face those natural hazards, and this has been really positive. Those preparedness action started in the recent year. So it still need to be scaled up in various seats. Yeah.
Is it something you found with these analyses becoming more analytical with time, that they had generally been descriptive or insufficient and had improved, or was that something you saw differences between the different regions?
Yeah, there's the differences between different regions. And one systematic analysis that is done for IFAD project is what we call the SECA, the Social, Environmental, and Climate Analysis process. And this has been done for all strategy, all country strategy and program. And this not only theoretical, but also propose some action to be implemented. Yeah, but climate specifically, natural hazard aspect has not been one of the core area of those analysis. Over.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. We have another question in the chat, and was the partnership landscape within the scope of the evaluation, and how did IFAD navigate it to ensure coherent support for SIDS?
Asia, do you want to answer or should I?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, partnership is systematically one of evaluation criteria analyzed by IFAD. That's what we put into the context of non-lending activity. Partnership has been analyzed and have been subject to one strategic recommendation for the evaluation. And IFAD has been strong in those areas in terms of resource mobilization, working to mobilize resources for other partners, but working together, operational partnership with other has been difficult because also of the mandate for the different organizations. So, and this has been subject of one recommendation of the IFAD. So, yeah, definitely it is very important we analyze and we make a recommendation on that particular aspect. Over.
Thanks very much, Max. We have a question that's just come through about the extent to which the private sector played a role in resilience building in these contexts. Was that something that the evaluation examined?
What we will say, what I can say for that, yes, definitely, but not to IFAD support. Be reminded, in those contests, many of those seats, tourism is a source of income, is a major source of income. And that's where the private sector operates. But for smallholder, no, it's not attractive. No, there's no attractivity for the private sector. So if we have to look at the private sector, it's only for services. Yeah. Okay.
No, thank you. Another question has just come through about the role of regional organizations for knowledge sharing and coordinated planning. What had the evaluation found about the role they played in these areas?
Max, if I may.
Over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because this really varies across the different regions. Again, each case is unique and also reflected on each region. So for example, we observed that in the Latin American and Caribbean region, there's a strong, let's say, expertise in terms of knowledge management, different networks. There's a lot of sharing, South cooperation, as we call it. So there you can see influence, including from some of the development approaches that would even sort of be considered within the investments. And that also led not necessarily to coordinated planning, but influence to some extent the discussion around the topic. So there was, let's say, in LAC, we observe a more coherent view of the challenges across the different countries. And we saw that there were some efforts among the countries also to collaborate and to share knowledge. let's say that in other regions, there's a little bit more less connection between those topics. Also because countries are bigger, they have different challenges. For example, in the case of WCA, we did not see a strong connection there. There was less number of connection between countries and less knowledge management. The capacities were different as well. And there was less investment in that area. Then we see East and Southern Africa, and there was a little bit more. There were some efforts and more recent ones. So that was a good observation that we saw, for example, different IFIs like the African Development Bank or other regional organizations that were also trying to push towards the policy and trying to influence some of the actions there. So again, it really varies and it really depends on the capacities, on the efforts, and even some of the different, let's say, waves of policy that come through the different regions. And that's also reflected in the investments and, of course, in IFAD's investment with the beneficiaries.
Thank you, Maciel, and thanks to everyone for your questions thus far. While we're waiting for more questions to come through, I have a question for Max on the economic resilience of smallholders, and what are some of the measures or approaches that you noted that were promoted through IFAD support across the three regions looked at for better economic resilience?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's very important because livelihood is critical and the smallholder livelihood is very important. Access to markets is a challenge in those contexts. And in order to enable access to smallholder access to market, IFAD supported a lot of strengthening farmer organization and try to link farmer to buyer. For instance, in Seychelles, strengthening agricultural production and capacity of farmer and linking them for some buyers, tourists in that are working with sector of tourism. That will be very important. I think in Sao Tome and Principe also farmer organization has been strengthened in terms of cocoa production, and they have established linkages with organization or to buy organic cocoa produced by smallholder. In Latin America, Caribbean region, significant investment were also made in processing facility, and also in few cases we found that there have been rehabilitation of rural road to enable farmer to access market. In Guinea-Bissau, IFAD supported also rehabilitation of rural road, but also to buy some big boat to allow farmer to move from one island to another. So those are the main points in terms of enabling access to market. The bottom, the enabler of all those action has been supporting agricultural productivity, because once the production increase, so IFAD is able to work on access to market, because without access to market, the production cannot be sustained. Yeah, over.
Thanks, Max. I mean, I think the infrastructure challenges are particularly notable in this area. So it was useful to learn the lessons that you've mentioned. Maciel, I'm wondering about the climate resilience on the individual and community level, and what was found in terms of some examples of resilience at this level and mechanisms that IFAD supported.
Yep, no, that's a very relevant question because, in fact, the mechanisms supported by IFAD also were significant in terms of contributing towards the success of the different investments. So what we saw that were the main mechanisms, both at individual and community level, that worked were mostly, and this is across regions, were mostly community-led planning and governance, which played a key central role in terms of improved local decision, community level engagement, adoption of certain practices, or even scaling up or replicating some of the activities. So for example, in Kiribati, in Tonga and Comoros, these approaches really enhance control of water, soil, and ecosystem resources. Then another very important mechanism that we saw is the promotion of integrated natural resource management. Again, this is well embedded with the community level mechanisms because in certain countries where you have high levels of, and this is of course the case of most seats where you have levels of climatic risks, it was very important to really understand the resources available and how to make the best use in order to tackle and promote resilience. So, for example, in Comoros, there were IFAD promoted anti-erosion structures, like watershed management, drought-tolerant crops. And then in Guinea-Bissau and Seychelles, there were mangrove restoration, riverbank protection, soil and coastal ecosystem, and others. And all of this towards reducing vulnerability to flood erosion and saline intrusion. And then another very relevant mechanism that we observed, and this is more, let's say, community, but also another level of local governance and institutions, is the capacity building among the different stakeholders. This was key for enabling long-term sustainable adoption of practices and also sustainability of overall investment, both, let's say, even physical or even investment in training and knowledge, etc. So, for example, in the Maldives, the strengthening of local capacity and also at the ministry level improved climate-related services, where in Cabo Verde, these investments benefited improved water governance structures. So I think there were several, but I will say that these were across the different regions that were the most common and that we saw very good results in terms of the investments.
Thanks, Maciel. We have just a couple of minutes left, so if there are additional questions, please do share them. But maybe we could just follow up on at the community level. And Max, if you could talk a bit more about the role and importance of grassroots organizations in climate resilience and SIDS, and specifically the contribution of specific groups like Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important. And that is an area of comparative advantage of IFAD support. IFAD effort to enable grassroots institutions to influence local development has been very important in those contexts because IFAD applied participatory approaches and institutional strengthening to integrate those grassroots organizations into the process. And these were prioritized, especially in contexts of Pacific like Tonga, Kiribati, and Fiji. It was less in some of the region, for instance, less strong in Guinea-Bissau and Seychelles. It was also of a challenge. Yeah. For instance, in Kiribati, one project was very good example of how participatory processes allow strengthening grassroots institutions through the formation of community development plan that were endorsed by the development authority and integrated in the planning process. In Fiji, also notable results are achieved in that context. In Sao Tome and Principe, which is in West Africa, also we had support that enabled establishing a strong, a robust farmer organization, a platform for support to cacao production. Now, when it comes to indigenous people, they are present in many seeds, especially in the LAC region and in the Pacific area. However, support in those groups has not been maximized as it should be. And that was one of the recommendations of the evaluation. Over.
Thanks, Max, and thanks, Maciel. Thanks to everybody who's joined this session. We've come to the end of it. We will be sharing the report. The report will be available on IOE's website, and once it is published, I think there's a link to our LinkedIn and our newsletter, in which you'll find all of IOE's events and publications. So these are really contexts that are some of the most vulnerable to climate change. So I think there's really important lessons to be gleaned from these. And thank you very much for sharing your experiences and for participating in this session. Wishing you all a good rest of your day and evening.
Thank you, Mona. Okay, bye.
Thank you.